kind of a complex description of this presentation in the summit schedule.
I didn't see what went there.
It was the submission you had originally made about bioregional publishing, but then I also added the decolonial poetics of a decolonial Cascadia to the title.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I made that thing, and then when I saw the how this was described, I thought I would give the talk that I gave at the recent Cascadia Poetry Festival. So I'll start that when you're ready.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. And maybe just could you give a brief short introduction to the Cascadia Poetry Festival and your work with SPLAB as well?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we're officially starting. My name is Paul Nelson, and I'm the founding director of the Cascadia Poetics Lab, formerly SPLAB, which stood for a couple of different things, the Northwest Spoken Word Lab and then the Seattle Poetics Lab. And people felt that Seattle was too confining, especially since we're working from Prince George to Arcata and to Kelowna and Spokane. So in September 2021, we changed the name of the organization to Cascadia Poetics Lab. So it connotes place, it connotes a stance toward poem making, and our mission is empowering people to practice poetry and deepen connections to place, self, and the present moment. So today I'm here with Dr. Jason Wirth. He chairs the philosophy department at Seattle University. He serves on the board of directors of the Cascadia Poetics Lab, and talk a little bit about the lab and about our current project, Cascadian Zen, and a little bit about this topic. And then I will share my notes from the Cascadia Poetry Festival number 7, which was conducted at Spring Street Center at 15th and Spring on October 6th, 7, and 8. We had a very good crowd, and by all accounts, it was a very successful event. People leaving, one person transformed at least. So that's kind of the work that we think is the highest and best outcome, that people are transformed, that they have a deep sense of place, and that they renew their commitment to place. And I'll get into that. But I'd like to let Jason speak, as he's so eloquent, and the organization really got into another gear when Jason joined the board. So I'm grateful to work with him, and especially on this latest project, Cascadian Zen, bioregional writings on Cascadia here and now. Jason, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. It's really a pleasure to work with Paul. He's really a brother from another mother. Thank you all for being here. I just have a few short comments, but I'd like to introduce you to a couple of things that I hope you would really enjoy knowing about. We have founded a new bioregional poetry and humanities imprint. It's called Watershed Press. And it's really to lift up the sorts of voices that we began lifting up in the volume 1 of this project right here, which I'd like to tell you a little bit about. We worked hard on it for some years, and it's one of its guiding influences is a person that you all know, David McCloskey. And so when you open the back of the book, you'll find this little insert right here, and very beautiful. There's lots of art in the book, and then you open it up, and you all recognize David McCloskey's work right here. He was a consultant on the volume. He himself had told me on more than one occasion that he always had dreamed of a book like this, that he was going to map it out, but it needed to be fleshed out. We needed to find the voices that speak of and from this place. And so some of the surgical decisions that we made: one, we treated the US-Canadian border, which just slices Cascadia into 2 unwieldy pieces. We gave it a Zen treatment. In Zen, you treat political borders like the clouds treat them. You just float right over them as if they're no big deal. And of course, it's a huge deal. And we're having all kinds of troubles trying to even mail things to Canada because it's so extraordinarily expensive, but we're working on that. And the title Cascadian Zen, we hope that it would be very provocative, but it's not, oh, wow, I don't have a Zen practice. What are you saying? You can't be a bioregionalist unless you do Zen. No, of course not. That's a ridiculous claim entirely. Zen was just kind of shorthand for any place-aware practice. And I say practice because an aspect of that practice is speaking, but that speaking itself is the symptom and not the ground. It's not just a bunch of people pontificating about Cascadia, but the deep practice of living and being here, enhancing it, depolluting it. That includes decolonizing it, lifting up some of its forgotten voices. So there's a lot of indigenous voices in here, both visual and also interviews and poems. And so Zen just is this catch-all phrase. There are some people in here who have a Zen practice. There are lots of others who think Zen sounds cool. They might want to try it someday. Others, it's just not going to ever be their thing, and that's fine. It's just a way of just trying to draw attention to words themselves being fruits of this place. It's going to come out in 2 volumes. This is volume 1. It's already quite hefty. It's over 400 pages. Lots of art. Paul, Adelia, and I, we honestly, we sweated over every quarter inch of this volume. It was nice to have the pandemic because everything stopped. So it allowed us to work furiously for throughout the entire pandemic on it. It helped a lot. Teresa Whitehill, also a book designer down in Mendocino, spent a year also designing the text, and it's just gorgeous. I'm very happy to say that it, among its many features that I think are first time ever, we worked very closely with Robert Bringhurst. I'm sure you all know him. He wears many hats, all of which are really quite impressive. One of them is he's one of the great typographers ever since the Renaissance, as far as I can tell. And he has designed a type for all Cascadian languages. And he shared the type with us. He also has several contributions in there. He also has a very beautiful essay that will be the lead essay, the introduction to volume 2, which will come out next year. And I just wanted to read just a couple of parts of our introduction in which we just give some bullet points as to what we're trying to do. I won't read them all. I'll just go through them quickly. So one I mentioned already. We're not implying that all the authors have a commitment to Zen practice or even a Buddhist practice more broadly, but rather they're expressing the heart-mind of this place. And of course, the heart-mind of this place, just like every bioregion, is extremely variegated, complex, interpenetrating strands of difference. And so the voices themselves all belong here, but as I hope we would all expect, are quite diverse. Some celebratory. I think by volume 2, you'll also see some very worried about the bioregion that gives rise to us all. It's also, of course, a clear Zen phrase that it speaks to what it is to be now and here in the membrane that is the Cascadian bioregion. So you don't have to bring it up explicitly, but really these poems are deeply about people who are here, friends of people who are here. And attention was, I'll read this right here, was given to including some of the most recognized and celebrated practitioners of Cascadia. So most of the poets that you all have heard of and celebrated, the Gary Snyders and Diane DePrimas and Daphne Marlitz, the Bringhursts, etc. Really, I think it's a star-studded cast on one side. But we also wanted to complement that with emerging and otherwise under-recognized voices. And of course, we all realize that volume 1 and volume 2, that's 650 pages, it's just a start. We're just getting the ball rolling. We're just trying to make this contagious, make this something that we all seek to do each in our own way. And it does not document the Cascadian heart-mind as if it were a fait accompli. It is designed to facilitate its awakening and deepening. It's closer to a practice manual or spiritual practice manual or resource book than it is to literary and philosophical record keeping. The whole book was inspired by McCloskey's new old way of thinking about Cascadia. That was our immediate way to just join hands and say, okay, McCloskey, you handed the baton to us. We're going to flesh out your map with voice and image. And the book itself not only emerges from the worlds of orature and literature, there's also interviews in here, stories that have been written down, but they belong to oral traditions, and lots, of course, literary works. But it's also rooted visually in its art, including indigenous work by luminaries like the Wiat artist Rick Bartow. That's already his incredible image on our cover. The Coast Salish artist Susan Point, and others. And finally, we've divided the entire project into 7 baskets. And we use the word basket very playfully. You know, in the Buddhist tradition, you speak of the Tripitaka, the 3 baskets. Also, the basket weaving traditions among Coast Salish peoples and other peoples, for which this area is well known and well celebrated. But just to hold together different constellations of voices. And so volume 1 is the first of 3 baskets. They're really big baskets. And then volume 2 will be the remaining 4. So basket 1, we've called The Buddha Way. Now I'll just give you a little taste of who's in this first basket. Daphne Marlett, Diane DePrima, Joanne Kiger, Cedar Saigo, Philip Whalen, Gary Snyder, Albert Saijo, Mushin Patricia Ikeda, Taryn Campbell, Kate Gable, Bob Redman, may he rest in power, Shirley Graham, Andrew Schelling, Jane Hirschfield, Peter Levitt, the great Zen master up there on Salt Spring Island, Robert Michael Pyle, Gabriela Guiterres y Mus, Jose Kozer, and then Paul and I have a little bit of things in there. The second basket we call Empty Bowl. Empty Bowl, as you know, is the famous bioregional press that goes back to the 1970s. Some of the people in that basket have published with Empty Bowl, but it's not so much to celebrate the press, although we esteem it highly, but to use that as a kind of a word to capture a certain ethos of Western Washington, or what's colonially referred to as Western Washington. So lots of people who knew each other, who whether or not they published an Empty Bowl or not, shared its aesthetic and certainly shared its poetic and political values. Those include Sam Hamill, Denise Levertov, Tim McNulty, the late and great Michael Connor, Michael Daly, Red Pine, Bill Porter, Ann Spires, Robert Sund, Robert Sund's student, Glenn or Chip Hughes, Sam Green from Waldron Island, Holly Hughes, Tess Gallagher, Alice Derry, Alicia Hokinson, the late Bill Yake, the late Tom Jay, Judith Roche, also may she rest in power, the philosopher Josh Hayes writing on Robert Sund, and then Thomas Hitoshi Prixma. The third basket, and I'll finish with this, we call Original Mind. And Original Mind is kind of playing with the kind of place-based practices of really trying to get to the depths of your mind as it is animated and informed and of and from the land. And this includes Robert Bringhurst, the Zen Tao philosopher and poet Ray Grigg, an interview with the indigenous elder Wed Lady Speck that Paul and I did during the pandemic, Rena Priest of Lummi Nation, the philosopher and poet Jan Zwicky, Adelia McWilliam, the late great Robin Blazer, Brenda Hillman. In an interview with George Stanley by the recently departed Barry McKinnon. Some poems by George Stanley, Kate Braid, Gary Copeland Lilly, Jamie McCarty, Rue Borson, John Brehm, Michael McClure, Paul Nelson, and then the recently departed Mary Norbert Corte, or Kurte, as her German name would be pronounced, with a little umlaut. Yeah, among the last things she did in the public world were the poems that she sent for our volume. So that's really special. And then the postface to both volumes are original essays by David McCloskey, in which he tries to take his work and his map making and his activism and show how it's interwoven in our work. So that's also very exciting. So thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to any questions you may have after Paul's scintillating words.
Gracias, professor. Just a joy to hear you talk about this work. It never gets old. More of it's revealed each time you talk. It's a real joy to be here with you. And I'm grateful to Brandon and everybody who's put this event together. I caught some of the morning session with Joe Brewer, and it was amazing, the work that was done in such a quick time, and to connect like-minded people. This is really, really important work. As Joe was saying this morning, this is the most important work happening on the planet right now. I think he was quoting an indigenous elder. So, Brandon, maybe I could get on the spotlight or get pinned, or do I do that? Yeah, I'll just do that like that. Cascadia Poetics Lab started many years ago, 30 years ago. We'll be celebrating 30 years in December, and we have an event on February 2nd at the Columbia City Gallery to celebrate the release of our second book of interviews, Cascadian Prophets, which is now going to be the name of our second book of transcribed interviews. The first one was American Prophets, in time for our 20th. Is it the 20th anniversary? That might have been the 25th. And we started as a nonprofit organization producing and syndicating public affairs radio interview programs. And at the height of syndication, we're on 18 stations weekly, stations like The Mountain and KZOK and King FM and KGON in Portland and Village 900 in Victoria and other stations. So Cascadian Prophets is also the name of our current podcast. And Lorna D. Cervantes has been our latest guest. I've interviewed Robert Bringhurst, and that will be coming in December. In the past, people like Gabriela Gutierrez Imuz and Stephen Thomas and others. You can see that on the website, cascadiapoeticslab.org. As if the podcast weren't enough, we do the Cascadia Poetry Festival. We've done 7 iterations of it in places like Tacoma and Anacortes and Nanaimo, and of course, Seattle several times. And we're planning the next one, Cascadia Poetry Fest 8, at the Spring Street Center, November 1, 2, and 3 of next year. The Poetry Postcard Fest last year had 518 poets registered to send everybody on their list of 32 poets an original poem on a postcard between the 4th of July and the 31st of October. And they were in 8 different countries. And it's a really remarkable thing. But it helps people get the poetics, the spontaneous poetics that we espouse and that we know is transformative. We're also interested in daylighting Mapes Creek, and we have an event we're planning for July of next year at the new stage they've put in Mapes Creek in Beersheba Park next to Mapes Creek. And more on that, postcards from home will be forthcoming. So in terms of the poetics of post-decolonial Cascadia, I'd like to start with a quote from an Aboriginal elder, Mary Graham, from the Kombu Mary tribe. She said, "I'm located, therefore I am," really, which is the essence of bioregionalism, and the ties between a bioregional take and indigenous take, I think, become very clear to people who look at this for a little while. And a poem, I think, that illustrates the point. Ah, to be alive on a mid-September morn, fording a stream, barefoot, pants rolled up, holding boots, pack on, sunshine, ice in the shallows, northern Rockies. Rustle and shimmer of icy creek waters. Stones turn underfoot, small and hard as toes. Cold nose dripping, singing inside. Creek music, heart music, smell of sun on gravel. I pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the soil of Turtle Island and to the beings who thereon dwell, one ecosystem in diversity under the sun with joyful interpenetration for all. Gary Snyder. So the Poetics of the Cascadia Poetics Lab developed over 30 years. And what I hope is communicated is a sense of the radical, decolonial, and soul-building nature of these poetics, always telling it slant, which is Emily Dickinson's advice, and my way for better or worse, maybe because of the ADHD, I don't know. Gary Snyder may be the quintessential bioregional poet. He was there when bioregionalism was being formulated, and he has the greatest short definition of bioregionalism, which is stay put, watch what happens. How does this stance, staying put, contrast with what the bioregionalists have been saying since the 70s, that people live on this land like invaders, or worst, like tourists? You see why Michael Daly called his book Re-inhabited, and why he said, when I interviewed him in July of 2022, that bioregionalism is an anti-colonialist stance. To imagine national borders created by nature and not by white generals, sometimes using a map, is a transformative gesture. But of course, thanks to David McCloskey, his life's work, his maps, we don't have to imagine. We can see it, and you can see it in the book Cascadian Zen, and it's a beautiful feature. In 1992, I interviewed Peter Berg, who founded the Planet Drum Foundation. They're 50 years old this year, which is outstanding. In the interview back in 92, conducted a year before we were founded, he said the imperative is that we learn how to live in harmony with natural systems in sustainable ways. That means we live, the way we live would change, the kinds of things we would do to get basic human needs, such as food, shelter, water, and I would include culture in that, would be more adaptable to the place itself. Elsewhere, he said one of the goals of bioregionalism is to support the work of re-inhabitation, of people becoming native to the places where they live. At Benaroya Hall, Gary Snyder said he thought it would take 1,000 years for us to become indigenous here in Cascadia. David McCloskey and every indigenous elder would say we need a culture that comes up out of this place and is the place speaking through each person. Peter and Gary and Diane DePrima and Joanne Kiger and others were saying it in the 70s, Chief Seattle in the mid-1800s, and now we have the Anthropocene and checking the air quality index on summer days to see if we can safely go outside. The quality of air may be one thing that gets across to mass consciousness what the commons is, or as I said in a poem once, it's weather will get their attention. Weather certainly got my attention today. Huge lake here at Henderson and Seward Park Avenue South with people plowing through with no regard for pedestrians. And I was already soaked, so it really didn't matter too much, but I thought it was kind of rude. But yeah, these giant puddles created because people, you know, need to help out, need to sweep the leaves out of the gutter drains. In 1994, I interviewed Allen Ginsberg. He talked about open form in North American poetry, starting with Walt Whitman. He talked about first thought, best thought, which he likened to Buddhism, and the need for specifics in the poem. He's got a great list of mind writing slogans. If you Google that, you find the Ginsberg Foundation website. And I think they're very useful for a bioregional poetics. Related to this is Charles Olson, who in his essay Human Universe talked about how particularism, luminous details must be fought for anew, and that discourse prevents discovery, is a dodge. And he said the distinction here is between language as the act of the instant, which would be his preference, and language as the act of thought about the instant, which creates already a degree of separation. So these notions resonate with me deeply. They fall right into the kind of stance toward reality that Olson said brings a certain kind of verse into being, a stance that is systemic, radical, meaning affecting the roots, and one might say sustainable. in the way Peterburg was using it. A poetics that comes out of Alfred North Whitehead, and I think Huayan Buddhism, with similarities to the writings of Dogen and Keiji Nishitani of the Kyoto School of Philosophy. Of course, Charles Olson very much influenced by Francis Boldereff. The great Cascadia poet Sharon Thiessen she did a talk at the Gloucester Writers Center on Boldereff's connection with Olson and perhaps her influence. There's Denise Levertov's Some Notes on Organic Form that was written before she lived in Cascadia, but the fact that she chose to live here the last 8 years of her life, I think, is telling. We are teaching her book, Overland to the Islands, in our online poetry workshops. So I mentioned the Commons at least once. I should note that the Cascadia Poetics Lab has existed for 30 years, despite the subversive nature of our content, of the radio shows, the podcasts, and the stance toward poem making, and the cosmology that underpins that. One of the biggest influences on me was interviewing Michael McClure in October of 1995. By the way, almost all of this audio is online. So if you go to cascadiapoeticslab.org and go to the listen button, you can either see the current interviews, the podcasts, or go to the historic archive, much of which is safely being taken care of at the White River Valley Museum in Auburn, Washington. So projective, organic, bioregional, and active discovery, a commitment to hear, to the coots, osprey, eagles, ducks, song sparrows, geese, buffleheads, beavers, Caspian terns, and other critters of Nukwokwe. That's the name of the creek that many people call Mapes Creek. A commitment to this place is key. It's radical. It's decolonial and or post-colonial, however you want to say it, and it's what we're about. So I'm grateful for the work of Brandon Letzinger. I'm grateful to work with Jason Wirth. And if you'd like to see what I've been talking about or where I've gotten my notes, I will just quickly do a screen share, and so you can see where that is. This is on my personal website, paulenelson.com, but it looks like this: the Poetics of Decolonial Cascadia. And there's the logo for our 7th Cascadia Poetry Festival, which just happened. We would very much like to work with anyone who resonates with what we've just talked about. Thank you for your time. So Brandon, do you want to moderate questions, or should we look to chat for that? Or if people want to just speak up, that'd be great. Or Jason, if you have any notes you'd like to add, fire away.
Nope. I think it's time for us to engage the audience. With a lot of discourse, a lot of things came at you all quickly, so we're happy to repeat things too. Oh, Doris, and I see your chat too. You've got some poems.
Yes, I could read an appropriate poem if you would want me to.
Sure, we'd love it.
Okay. I wrote this in May of 2021. We are guardians and activists for the future, for the just borns and the not yet borns, the souls that are jammed up at the cosmic borders. They're the ones that will have a chance to live with the still bending arc of moral justice that pushes ahead to the time when the givers and the thinkers and lovers can create one human society. And welcome the future all beings inherit. They be lining up with their best little cherub selves to have another try at perfection, to make the world better.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doris. Well, if we're in poem sharing mode, I'd like to read my poem for Barry McKinnon, since I understand the 7 o'clock session was is going to be about honoring those who've passed. So I'm gonna do a screen share for that. So let me just pull that up. This will tell you something about Barry. Barry McKinnon in ICU. in maple leaf dropping season, multiple organ failure as the body cancels itself and you bury with it. You won't need a spleen where you're going. The imagined real place where there is no beer and no nothing to try and drink away. You wanted to tell us something of your live off potatoes genetics and prairie ignorance of blunt men and plump wives. How now you're not consumed by age, but rage maybe, a cancel culture casualty. You killed him in your rancid prairie poncho. Hijo de puta, we might say if we unleash the Rexroth in us. Another maple leaf falls and you watch it writhe and twist in the no October wind. Barry, you were just a boy back then, hearing your dad's drunk threat to burn the goddamn house down. And how what paternal words shape a maple leaf's descent, how death's no veil but a folding in space without wind. Fred and love at 1 cent a mile, and bury you as one other fall, descent, sedated, no more humid winters, no more 4-day beer benders. Just watch a master poet's life as it whizzes past your eyelids better than you remembered it. Trading eighths in Calgary with Joni Mitchell, Nee Anderson in the room, the Depression coffee house with her capo and guitar. Laughing at the Creeley gig in Prince George. Yes, was you got him there, you who plopped poetry into the pulp mills and sawdust, log trucks and choke cherries, somehow not knowing how your days would end in the ICU, heart, spleen, liver, guts, all with enough of this bitter illusion in the unknown somewhere where we take the reign, our future without you, dear truth teacher, dear canceled poet. Larry said poetry is the mind already in the afterlife. Of course, you beat us there. And there's information about Barry McKinnon on the Cascadia Poetics Lab website and on my personal website. So
Beautiful poem. Thank you.
thanks, Christine. So I think we've done it. We haven't had many questions, but that's okay. This will be recorded for posterity, and I'm grateful for that, Brandon. Grateful for your efforts. Grateful for Cascadia Now. Ravi has a question. Jason, you want to pick that out of chat before we go?
Do you have a favorite bioregional theme poem to read? That's like, which of your children shall live?
Well, I think that Gary Snyder poem really was one, but surely, Jason, you could pick one out of the book if you like. You know, so many of these have great import for the bioregion. I like Mary Norbert Corti's poem Lares et Penates. Mary Norbert Corti was a nun who got special dispensation to attend the 1965 Berkeley Poetry Conference, where she engaged Jack Spicer. And there's a great photo of her in her habit and Jack Spicer there. She asked him if he thought that the Union songs of the 20s and 30s would be considered poetry, and he agreed with it. I had her read this poem when I interviewed her at her home in extreme southern Cascadia in Willits. Lares et Penates. Buddha, bear, the angel, the cat, these three watch under their benevolent gaze. Scorpions become docile, mice stay outside, spiders calmly take care of flies, children cease squabbling, men pick up after themselves. One must pay attention over long little years to the long line of little gods, ancestors in portraits, lithographs, shelved statues. They made us, they live with us, we are their children. We are their children.
I'll read a Gary Snyder poem. As I'm sure most of you know, Snyder spent 10 years in Japan. He was a very serious student of Zen. He was also very close friends and also roommate at Reed College with Philip Whalen. Philip Whalen went on to be a Soto Zen priest. Zenshin was his, Zenshin means Zen mind. That was his Dharma name. And when Whalen died in 2002, Snyder wrote an extremely beautiful poem that I think both resonates with the sadness of our mortality, but also gives it a very deep Cascadian sensibility. Poem is called For Philip Zenshin Whalen, died 26 June 2002, and for 38 pine trees. Load of logs, changed, cinched down, and double-checked. The truck heads slowly up the hill. I bow namaste and farewell these Ponderosa pine, whose air and rain and sun we shared for 30 years. Struck by beetles, needles turning rusty brown and moving on. Decking, shelving, siding, stringers, studs, and joists. I will think of you, pines from this mountain, as you shelter people in the valley, years to come.
Here's one from the book by Sam Hamill. He ended his collected poems with this poem. Of Cascadia. I came here nearly 40 years ago, broke and half broken, having chosen the mud, the dirt road, alder pollen, and 100 avenues of gray across the sky to be my teachers and my muses. I chose a temple made of words and made a vow. I scratched a life in hardpan. If I cried for mercy or cried out in delight, it was because I was a man choosing carefully his way in his words, growing as slowly as the trunks of cedars in the sunlit garden. Let the ferns and moss remember all that I have lost or loved, for I carry no regrets, no ambition to live it all again. I can't make it better than it's been or will be again as the seasons turn and an old man's heart turns nostalgic as he drinks alone. I have lived in Cascadia, no paradise nor any hell, but both at once and made, as Elitis said, of the same material. A poor poet, I studied war and love, but Cascadia is what I'm of.
Wow, beautiful. I would like to share a poem here that someone wrote that I've been leaning on this last month, of all the stuff that's going on in the horrible world out there. May I share it?
Absolutely.
It's by Elaine Sutton, and it's called After a Sleepless Night. After a sleepless night, worrying about the world, I stand in the whispering grass, watching the mountains crouch under their burden of sky. The morning sun glides above the peaks, and the field is suddenly flooded with turquoise light. A flock of redwings rise. They turn together like a page of poetry. I read between the lines, realize I am lonely and afraid. I worry about the wars, the weather, the end of our beautiful broken world. I see the way we can harden our hearts when fear is what moves us. Now the marsh hawk cruises the yellow reeds. She dives swiftly, and some soft-furred creature's life is over. For each of us, hauling our basket of dreams, it is only one breath, that divides this world and the next. What is there to do then but give thanks, offer praise and gratitude for the sweetness we're allotted, fling open our burning hearts and help each other.
Amen.
I feel like in this group, people are flinging open their burning hearts and helping one another. So
I think that's true. I think that's absolutely
I
true.
agree. Absolutely. Jason, you pulled another one out?
Yeah, just one last one because it's really inspired by all the poems I've heard. All the poems in here are great, so I'm not somehow ranking them or pulling the best out. But it's it's hard to love Cascadia because it, like every place else, is wounded and under threat in so many ways, and it's all overwhelming. And you try to do everything you can, and of course, it's never enough. But in my tradition, I'm a Buddhist priest in the Soto Zen tradition. We chant 4 vows every day. The first is the Bodhisattva vow. Sentient beings are numberless. So, I mean, impossible. It's huge. I mean, you don't even know how to count it. I vow to free them. It's insane. It's an insane thing to do, but at the same time, err on doing everything, even though we'll probably succeed in having done very little. But err on that side. That's where your heart should be. So in that way, I'll leave you with a poem by Albert Saijo. Saijo was also a Buddhist poet. Some of you may know him also as friends of Gary Snyder, Philip Whalen, and Lou Welch. This is a poem we wrote quite late about this vow that I mentioned to you, as we try to keep our hearts open despite it all. It's called Bodhisattva Vows. Bodhisattva vows to be the last one off the sinking ship. You sign up and find out it's forever. Passenger list endless. Ship never empties. Ship keeps sinking, but doesn't quite go under. Onboard angst, panic, and desperation hold sway. Turns out bodhisattvahood is a fucking job like any other, but different in that there's no weekends or holidays, no vacations, no golden years of retirement. You're spending all your time and energy getting other people off the sinking ship into lifeboats bound gaily for nirvana, while there you are sinking. And of course, you had to go and give your life jacket away. So now let us be cheerful as we sink, our spirit ever buoyant as we sink. That's
Well, I'm going to let that be the last word.
Yeah, that. Who was that? Bodhisattvahood. Who was the author?
His name is Albert Saijo. Albert
S.I.
Saijo. Saijo.
Thank you. Albert.
Albert Saijo, yeah.
Good
And
friend of Joanne Kiger.
Yep.
This
And
is
Gary
about
Snyder.
Cascadia Zen. Yep.
That whole crew. He took a very famous haiku trip across the country with Lou Welch and Jack Kerouac.
That trip. Okay.
Well, may I be brave and offer one more?
Sure.
So I was a fair trade activist in the WTO events, and then I was in going to the UW as an older student. They let me in because I was an activist. So I went to Brazil for the World Social Forum, and this is what I started writing when I got on the airplane. Encanto, enchantment. I witnessed the birth of a new world in Porto Alegre, Brazil, and 6 million midwives lent a hand. The belly of our mother bulged, even though her abundance was shackled. A broiling wind arose as a witch stirred her vacant cauldron that gaped with a sacred hunger. Her enchantment swirled round the globe. A corpuscular uncle collapsed at the side of the cratered road, and few came to his aid. Some made a monument, but it fell into disrepair. Meanwhile, our mother called out to her children to gather at her side. The seeds couldn't hold back and tumbled out as the midwives watched in awe. Then by struggle and miracle, each seed broke open, and an army of workers suckled. Their backs became strong and their voices joyous. Celebration spread throughout the world, and in the barrios, the mothers ate mangoes. Together, they shouted that humanity is one family. Flying home from the christening, the lights of Cuba blended into the starry night. A piece of my heart has taken root in Brazil. Later, over the American South, built on the backs of slaves, I recall the power of words and the magical web they spin, and the strength of hands held together, and the work of all for all. Another world is possible.
Beautiful, Doris. Thank you.
Thank you.
I remember that WTO time. It was a hopeful time, and very staunch bioregionalist Dan McCloskey, who's on the Watershed Press board, helped to organize the protests here in Seattle, the battle in Seattle, and
It was
so
amazing.
it really was. It was uplifting and inspiring. So,
Yep.
and you know, and of course, Occupy happened not too long after that. So, there's a thread that we can see through American history. What did the historian call it? The People's History, then Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States, right? Right. So I'm grateful to be part of this history happening in this bioregional animation regeneration experience. I'm grateful to work with Professor Wirth. Grateful that he's added so much to what we're trying to do. We encourage you to check out Cascadian Zen. Look at our website, CascadiaPoeticsLab.org. Listen to our webcast on Spotify, Cascadian Prophets, and be in touch. We would love to daylight Mapes Creek. The fact that this creek goes through a neighborhood that has a lot of housing projects might be connected to the fact that most of it's covered with very ugly asphalt. So if you're interested in working on such a project or just want to know more about it, please let us know. And thank you all for being here and taking time out of your busy lives to do this work. I think it's some of the most important work being done on the planet. And that's why I gravitate towards bioregionalism. And I'm grateful to Brandon Letzinger for keeping it going for so long. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Thank you, Brother Paul. Thank you, Brandon. Thank each and every one of you. And as Angela Davis said, it's absolutely imperative to remember that change is possible.
Can I tell you something about her? I was watching that show of Finding Your Roots, Henry Louis Gates, and she actually has a Mayflower relative. She was just blown away to hear that from the DNA. Angela Davis, of all people, with a pilgrim.
Well, she was born in Birmingham, Alabama. So there
The
you go.
ironies of the world. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jason. That was really wonderful. And I see a few people also now joining. How are you doing, Forrest? How are you doing, Lance?
All good.
Good. And so I think we're just kind of wrapping up. What was that?
I said, getting ready.
Good. Yeah, I think so. We're just kind of wrapping up the Cascadia Poetics and Poetics of a Decolonial Cascadia. And thank you so much for joining us. And then I think so next, we just really wanted to open it up and invite people to join us for Cascadia Elders and Ancestors. And so Lance is going to be kind of, I think, opening us up with that. Lansing Scott, and I think many of the other people here have been involved with this work for decades. And I know Lansing Scott helped write or organize, was it the 1986 Bioregional Congress, or was it the 1988?
88 was my main organizing, but I attended it in 86.
And then Forrest, I think you, anyways, I'll just turn it over and open it up. But I think there's a lot of really amazing experience in this room, and we just really wanted to give space for people to connect. And then also to share some of the knowledge, wisdom, stories, and then also kind of remember and honor people who aren't here with us anymore, so we can carry their traditions, their work, of which this has been built on for decades, forward with us and really connect it to the work today. So I think it's really important to do that. So I really appreciate everybody taking time to be here tonight.
So should we wait